No new cases overnight, which is fantastic news. We've still got another 6 days to go before we can feel that we've safely got through that latest cluster of cases. And we also have some more individuals who've just made it across the border who we're testing and getting those results on. So we all have to remain alert for the next 6 days, but then ongoing after that. It is really, really important that every Queenslander continue, if they become sick, to stay at home and immediately get tested, to maintain that very, very important social distancing and wash their hands regularly, and also to not go to places where we know there are a lot of cases. So
and as the advice is that do not go to the places where you know there's a lot of cases, and of course take those safety precautions and those measures. It is so very important. But right now where the talk is all happening about Victoria, so let's hear from Premier Daniel Andrews, two of his notes, and then we will join in with the Prime Minister in his response.
It is a very significant issue, and as you rightly point out, that's not one that's that I can make announcements about, but the Prime Minister and Minister Tehan, I think in some comments he made yesterday, there is an acknowledgement, and I suppose in many respects it's not just about attitude or any comments that are made now. The runs are on the board, if you like, in that there was a direct intervention by the Commonwealth Government to support this sector, and I know there are lots of different discussions going on about that, but they're not matters for me to announce. They're indeed a matter for the federal government. I think you need to have the minimum number of people coming to your house under any circumstances. Under any circumstances. That is the most. Brett can speak to this, but you've just in every way you've got to be limiting the number of people that come to your home, and you should ideally have no one coming to your home. We'll have some more announcements to make this week about a permit system where people will have a piece of paper that says this is where I work, this is what I do, so that for the purposes of enforcement, curfew, all of those things, we don't want to be putting people into that really challenging situation where they have to explain themselves even though they don't really need to. But that's going to be a simple, common sense process, and we'll have more to say about that soon. As it is now, the curfew obviously does apply, 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. every day. If giving care, getting care, or going to and from work, or being at work, they're the only reasons to be out. Police will be stopping you. They will be asking those questions. They'll do it respectfully, and they'll be very fair in these early days, in that they'll probably err on the side of, it is early, but the time will come when that gets turned off, and anyone who's stopped and doesn't have a lawful reason will get fined. In terms of...
And that message there is quite clear that, if you violate those rules, that you will get fined. And of course, the economic downturn with so many businesses closing, so what's it going to look like in the coming days, and what would be the further outlook moving forward, once again addressed by Premier Daniel Andrews?
These are heartbreaking decisions, but there is simply no choice. The advice from our medical experts is that this is the only way to get these numbers under control, to drive them down low enough so that we can open up again. The alternative is a 6-month strategy, not a 6-week strategy, and then even at that point, significant doubt that would work. We cannot continue to have 400 and 500 cases a day and so many people in hospital, so many people dying. We've got to drive these numbers down, and if we continue to have the sort of movement that across the community, across the economy, as is part of stage 3, if we don't move to the further restrictions I've announced today, then we simply won't drive those numbers down. That strategy has avoided our hospitals being completely overrun and many, many thousands of cases each day. But that stability is not enough. We need to drive these numbers down, and as Professor Sutton has just indicated, instead of every positive person infecting another person, only every second or third or fourth person who gets the virus passing it on to someone else. That's what these restrictions are all about. It's heartbreaking, it's very challenging, but these are the tough calls that have to be made. Otherwise, we're not in for a 6-week set of restrictions. We're in for a 6-month strategy that I don't think will work. It is very, very...
And as that's mentioned, very tough measures there that will be implemented. Of course, we've had people crossing over from Victoria into Queensland as well, and that has caused a lot of problems here as well. Many functions have to be cancelled, many things had to be put on hold. But our hearts do go out to everyone there in Victoria. Please stay safe and just follow the rules that have been laid down, and it's all for the better of everyone. So let's hear from our Prime Minister on the situation.
I know that across Victoria, many today, frankly, would have reached breaking point, trying to come to terms with what has happened in their state, what it means for them, what it means for their family, what it means for their businesses. They've worked so hard for their jobs, for their livelihoods, for the care of their children and their education. It's heartbreaking. This pandemic, this virus, is taking a heavy toll. And I know Victorians know what needs to be done now, and I know many will find it really hard. But we're all counting on them to do it. And we're all in it with them as best as we possibly can. And what I've announced this evening on this disaster payment support with pandemic leave, the $14 billion that have already been put in, the many other measures that have been there to support, it's all there to help them get through. I'm backing Melbourne, I'm backing Victoria, and I know they will get through this. Thank you very much.
And as he said, that he's backing Melburnians and Victoria. And we will talk a little bit more about that pandemic paid leave as well, further into the news as we get into the news in brief section. Well, getting a little bit away from this pandemic, because that seems to be taking all of our time and most of our focus and energy, because that is the biggest thing at the moment, the talk of, when we look at everything, while all this is happening as well, there's some progress being made. Progress is being made in the area of 5G network. So what is the 5G actually? The truth about 5G. So, around Australia, a vocal band of activists have joined the worldwide protest movement against the arrival of the next generation wireless technology known as 5G. So there's such a big protest about that as well. So what is it, and why, why are people so opposed to that, and what are the truths about that? So let's see if we can, throw a little bit of light on what it is all about. As we know, we have all now started living with internet, and it's here to stay.
I'm under arrest.
If you are not currently working to stop 5G, this means you don't understand it. Nothing else matters anymore.
Stop 5G! Stop 5G! Stop 5G! 5G!
Around the world, a new protest movement is stoking fear and anger. Their fight is against the next generation of wireless technology, 5G, that's predicted to change our lives.
This is going to allow a whole revolution in the way we live and organise ourselves.
It's going to really change the world, because 5G can do things that 4G could never do. It really is going to be a game changer.
Despite its extraordinary promise, the opposition to 5G has in some places turned violent. It's fueled wild conspiracy theories that have quickly spilled from online into the real world.
5G burning, bro.
And there are much bigger forces at play.
I think we'd be naive if we did not recognise the possibility that some of these claims are being generated by hostile governments.
While protesters rail against 5G's spread, a greater threat is looming: a global technology war.
The race to 5G is a race America must win. It's a race that we will win.
Tonight on Four Corners, we investigate what's behind the growing backlash against 5G and why the world's superpowers are vying for 5G dominance.
So that's a story to be followed, and as we know, even when the pandemic started, many people were blaming it on 5G and all the big antennas that were being placed in all the places. And people, as they say, there is always opposition to change, and change is inevitable. And they say the only constant in life is change. But whenever there is a change, there is always opposition. And of course, whenever there is a change, there's going to be side effects. There's going to be things spinning off that which will happen. If you have a room full of 4 people, you put a 5th person in there, it will change. So change is there, and that will be there forever. So looking at some of the changes, what's happening in the news industry? Well, James Maddock quits News Corporation. Why, and what's happening there? What's cooking in that part of the world? As we know, the Maddock empire has been dominating the news, and when I mean news, owning the news, meaning they own the biggest of the news outlets and the presses.
Rupert Murdoch's youngest son, James, was once the anointed heir to the family's global media empire.
It's a family saga. It's been tug-of-war for a long time.
There is something almost Shakespearean, the old man dividing his kingdom and the children having to dance attendance.
But the 47-year-old's decision to quit his seat on the board of News Corp has highlighted divisions within the Murdoch dynasty.
In his letter of resignation, James Murdoch cited disagreements over certain editorial content.
James Murdoch got his first big break in the family business when he was put in charge of Star TV in Hong Kong.
It was the first time I'd been a CEO of something big. It was a big turnaround, an urgent turnaround situation, and it was hard.
I mean, his mid-20s, James was always thought of as a potential candidate to replace Rupert Murdoch. There was seen to be the tussle between him and his brother, Lachlan.
He already owns The Times, The Sun, their Sunday sister publications, and now Rupert Murdoch wants to own even more of the satellite company B-Sky B.
In 2003, his father appointed him boss of the UK's B-Sky B television network. Not all shareholders were happy.
The appointment of his son is a prime example of this. It's nepotism.
After his brother...
As mentioned, a big family saga there, but now they have been so powerful in the media scene. Well, right now, I was talking about the pandemic leave. So what is it going to be like? We're not going to look at the whole scenario here today, but what we're going to do is we're going to talk to Sally McManus, who is the Secretary of Australian Council of Trade Unions. And according to her, the pandemic leave is a step forward, but she reckons that it just does not go far enough. It does not cut it through.
Sally McManus, the Prime Minister's announced a $1,500 pandemic leave payment this afternoon for Victorians. Does it meet what the ACTU and the Business Council were jointly calling for earlier today?
Well, look, it's a step forward, but it doesn't meet what we were calling for, and the reason why is for 2 reasons. First of all, we've got to eliminate any penalty whatsoever for people to isolate. So any financial penalty will be a disincentive for people to isolate. So $1,500 a fortnight is about the minimum wage. The average wage is more than double that. So for some workers, you're basically saying to them, if you've got to isolate, that you're going to have a significant pay cut. We've just got to take away that disincentive. It's just a hole in our defences. The second issue is about delivery. You just got to make it as simple and easy as possible, just like sick leave. You get sick leave, you get paid your normal leave, your employer pays it, the government reimburses it. That's what the Business Council and the ACTU were calling for. Whilst it's good, people aren't going to get nothing and there's going to be an improvement, it's still not what's needed to make sure we're doing absolutely everything we can to keep the virus under control.
What do you think is going to be the impact of the Victorian government's decision today to shut down almost all manufacturing and industry in the state?
Well, we know that that's going to lead to a lot of people being stood down. I think it's about 250,000 people in that situation. So that's going to have a big impact on people. Those people will end up being on JobKeeper. Unfortunately, if you're in the early childhood sector, because for some reason the government's excluded early childhood centres from JobKeeper, they will get nothing, which is something that really needs to be fixed and can be fixed tomorrow. For Victoria, I think the general idea is if this is what's got to be done, we've got to do it, and we've got to do it properly, and we've got to have the supports there for that 6-week period, because...
So as Sally mentioned there, that if it's worth doing, it's got to be done well. It will be wonderful and interesting to see, trade unions and their input into the coronavirus situation, to say, okay, right, this is what, we're coming food. Of course, demands are always there, and, it's always easy to ask and demand for things and condemn things. But going out and doing something constructive so that, the community can see, oh, wow, this is what they did, this is where they have been a little bit of compromising. They have come on board as well, and they have supported the movement, and they have actually stood by what the government is doing as well. So that would be a little bit interesting to see. But as we know, that all of this is going to have a big impact on the economic shockwaves from the Victorian coronavirus outbreak set to intensify. Now here, the word that's been used is Victorian coronavirus outbreak, and this is what people say the second wave that everyone's referring to as coming out of Victoria. Such was the case when the pandemic hit, that some people were calling it the Chinese virus, and even Donald Trump said that, and I think there was a lot of questions about racism and why is it being branded that. But anyway, it will have repercussions. Let's take a quick look at what the closing of the manufacturing sector would look like.
It takes quite a lot to render the official national economic forecasts redundant in a week.
The shock is far from over. This is obvious to Australians living in Victoria. Growth will be lower, unemployment will be higher.
Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy last week conceded that the forecasts the government had released just 1 week earlier had already been rendered redundant by the escalating health crisis in Melbourne. And that was before the announcements yesterday that Melbourne would enter an unprecedented lockdown, and today the outlining of businesses that would also face shutdowns.
Moving to stage 4 restrictions and extending the lockdown means the cost to GDP has tripled from $6 billion to over $20 billion.
Andrew Charlton has been compiling data on spending patterns in Australia. Total spending in Victoria was already 14% below the level of other states last week, and spending in cafes right across the state, not just in Melbourne, is almost a third lower than in New South Wales.
There is firstly a real economy impact as the lockdown ensures the border stays closed, disrupts logistics and supply chains and reduces the flow of goods and tourists across the border. But secondly, there's an important symbolic effect which can knock confidence.
The Everleigh Hotel in Melbourne will persist with delivering bottled cocktails to a city under curfew. But there seems to have been a material change in people's attitudes to the virus that goes beyond broad measures of confidence.
I think there are definitely two different types of lockdown that we've seen so far. I think the first one was definitely a lot more of a novelty, where everybody was really getting behind seeing their favourite venues deliver their goods to their homes. And I think the second one has probably brought around a little more fear as to how many times can you shut down and how much support can you give before you really have to take care of your own bank accounts.
So we know that the second lockdown and the measures that have been now put in place, which is also known as Victoria's new lockdown. So does that mean that the first strategy failed? What happened there? What were the plannings at that stage, and why did we have to come up with a new planning? Did the first stage or the first strategy fail?
It's tempting to assume that because Victoria has gone into much more extreme lockdown, the previous strategy failed. But that's actually not true. New research from the Burnet Institute, exclusive to 7:30, has shown just how bad the numbers in Victoria would have been without the Stage 3 lockdown. Before Melbourne introduced Stage 3 lockdowns, the reproduction number was 1.75. That means for every 10 infected people, they were passing the virus on to more than 17 others. The Level 3 restrictions brought that infection rate down to just over 11 people, which means that about 20,000 infections were avoided during July.
We can assume we would have had 3 to 4 times the number of deaths, 3 to 4 times the number of serious illnesses. So a very major impact of Stage 3 lockdown.
But according to Professor Brendan Crabb from the Burnet Institute, it would be a mistake to assume that the new measures put in place yesterday aren't necessary. There are still too many people being infected.
Well, we're still left with a community spread that is growing very slightly, just above an R0 of 1. Perhaps masks kicking in is going to take that closer to 1. We don't know the answer to that yet. So we don't have a epidemic in decline. We have the rate decreasing, but not an epidemic yet going down to zero, to elimination, which is where we want to get to in the community.
And that is the case that's happening. And I've been asked by Pia all the way from America that where is my mask? We are excused. So in a media and in a closed studio, you can get away without the mask. And such is the case here in Queensland, of course, on the streets as well. And Pandit Naveen, Radhe Radhe, and Devika, wonderful to have you on the show as well. Well, right now, let's take a quick look at Tasmania as we go around the states. Let's get a quick update from all the states before we close up for today. Tasmania will now keep itself closed till at least August 31st, and that applies to every jurisdiction.
Given the uncertainty in Victoria right now and the impact on other states, especially South Australia, I want to flag that we will be changing our border arrangements that were due to come into place this Friday in terms of travel to the Northern Territory, Western Australia and to South Australia, and also to flag that in terms of what might have been occurring on the 14th of this month in terms of Queensland, New South Wales and the ACT, that matters have now changed. We will not open our borders to anyone before the 31st of August this year. We will review those matters on a week-by-week basis, and I'll provide weekly updates throughout this period as we watch what is occurring in other parts of the country. Our borders have stood us in good stead, and it's important now that we ensure that whilst the difficulties that Victoria are facing and other parts of the country, it's important now that we remain vigilant, that we remain strong, and importantly that we ensure that we do whatever we can to keep Tasmanians safe through this. So to be clear, we will not be opening our borders to South Australia, the Northern Territory and WA this Friday as originally planned, nor will we be opening to other parts of the country on the 14th as previously flagged. Be reviewed on a week-by-week basis, but there'll be no border opening to any other jurisdictions before the 31st of August.
So those planned border openings will not take place as was originally planned and announced, and they will remain closed and remain shut for everyone. So right now we'll take a very quick look at New South Wales and look at the number of cases that's happening there. So what's the update from New South Wales?
13 cases in New South Wales. 3 of those were from overseas travellers. 1 was from someone who was returning from Victoria. So 4 out of those cases are either overseas or a returning traveller from Victoria. So again, can I reinforce the message we gave the community yesterday is for all of us to be on extra high alert, all of us to be on extra COVID safe, to appreciate that when we're in certain environments that we should be wearing a mask if we can't maintain social distancing, and for all of us to appreciate that the next few weeks are absolutely critical for New South Wales.
And that's the message there from New South Wales. And once again, new numbers of cases that have been reported there as well. And as we have seen, time and over again that it's always, rather than passing on through the communities, it's always brought in from someone coming from interstate or someone coming from overseas. And so that's the reality of the fact. Well, right now, let's take a very quick look at Krishna Janmashtami Fest night tonight, and it will be finishing on most of the places in Australia on Tuesday. As I said before, the Tithi will begin on Tuesday night and finish on Wednesday. And as we know, it's slightly different from across the many parts of the world. So let's take a very quick look at what Krishna Janmashtami might look like.
Krishna Janmashtami marks the birth anniversary of Lord Krishna, the 8th incarnation of Lord Vishnu. According to the Hindu Panchang, Janmashtami will be celebrated.
And it will be celebrated throughout the world with great vigor.
However, those following the Rohini Nakshatra will celebrate on the 20th.
Of course, as I mentioned, there will be celebrations on different dates in different parts of the world.
Of love, enthusiasm and unique traditions. Across the northern states of India, particularly in Vrindavan and Mathura, celebrations are grand.
And as we know that this year it might not be like that, we will not see this kind of crowds, but there's a lot of virtual functions that have been planned.
In northeast UP and Bihar, devotees keep a fast on this day and break it at midnight to mark Lord Krishna's birth. In Maharashtra, Goashtami is celebrated along with the Dahi Handi festival. A group of Govindas take to the streets, forming a human pyramid to break the matkas filled with one of Lord Krishna's favorite treats. In Gujarat, Dahi Handi is celebrated as Makhan Handi.
So as I mentioned before that, the celebrations begin tonight at many of the temples in and around here, Brisbane. And of course, if you're going to any of the temples, please check with the management committee first as to the number of people that are allowed in those premises, because if it gets too much, you might not be allowed to go in. So it will be not the fault of the committee, but that's the rules that they would be following. As we know, I'll be at the Gayatri Mandir tonight, as I'm there every Tuesday night. Well, talking about the other news coming out of India, and which everyone is following, a very symbolic day which will be tomorrow. Let's see how the preparations are going there for the Ram Mandir's Bhumi Puja.
Ayodhya is getting ready to witness the historic Ram Temple Bhumi Pujan on Wednesday. With just 2 days left for the grand ceremony, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath has now reached the holy city to oversee the preparations. According to the reports, he will be reviewing the preparations until 5 in the evening. Soil from 1,500 places and water from 100 different rivers has been brought for the temple construction. The ceremony, which had 208 guests, has now been cut short to 170 to 180, I beg your pardon, due to the pandemic. Prime Minister Modi will be gracing the mega event attended by Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, RSS Chief Mohan Bhagwat. Former Ayodhya litigant Iqbal Ansari was the first to get the invite and will welcome Modi. Prime Minister Modi will be laying the foundation stone of the temple, will arrive at 11:15 a.m. on 5th of August. He's directly going to be going to Hanuman Garhi temple to offer prayers and then head to Ram Janmabhoomi complex.
तैयारियां हो गई हैं, बाकी की तैयारियां हो रही हैं। देश के मूर्धन्य महात्मा संत बता रहे हैं और मोदी जी और योगी जी तो रहेंगे ही। इसके अलावा देश के महान संत कृपा करके आ रहे हैं। बड़ा दिव्य और भव्य आयोजन होगा।
देखिए 9 नवंबर को सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने जो है मुकदमे का फैसला हो गया। पूरे जो है हिंदुस्तान के मुसलमानों ने कोर्ट का सम्मान किया, इसलिए हम मुसलमान है का हिंदुस्तान का संविधान मानते हैं। अब जो है कोई झगड़ा नहीं है हिंदू मुसलमानों का। सवाल आज है, आज हमें ये जो कार्ड मिला है, अयोध्या धर्म की नगरी है और हमारे यहाँ जो तहजीब है, गंगा जमुनी तहजीब है हिंदुओं में, वो बरकरार है।
राम भक्त के नाते से ही
And that was such a good gesture there from the litigant of Babri Masjid, that he's overwhelmed by receiving a invitation to attend that puja. And as he mentioned in his speech, that all the disputes have been settled and there is no differences and they will all move together forward. So that is a wonderful news. So ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful having your company as usual. Let's take a very quick look at what's happening in and around Brisbane before we pen off for today. Online Hindu Dharma classes for children, and that's through Bal Sanskar Sen, which is part of Biswa Hindu Mahaparishad. And if we look at Biswa Hindu Mahaparishad, that is also part of the Bhumi Puja that will be happening in Ajodhya. Of course, the gala dinner has been postponed until further notice, and the GoPio Queensland will update everyone on any function that might happen or might not. So we will have to keep a tab on how things are progressing, what the directions are from the health department as well before anything's done. Mental health, Australia is doing a lot of online conferences. That's youth sections, that's unemployment and mental health. And of course, mental health during the pandemic as well, of people. How do you keep that sanity? And it is very important. So there's so many online seminars and webinars that are available. Please, make yourself available. Book into these webinars. Most of them are free online ones. Take part, and of course, if you can have your input into those seminars as well. It is all there for the community benefit. So ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'd need to say goodbye and wishing everyone who celebrates, the best for Janmashtami 2020, which will be remembered for a long time as, people will say, remember that year when the pandemic was there and how we all had to, have the social distancing and how hard it was to get people together for any functions and events. We are all in this together and we need to do our part, our little bit, everyone, each and everyone. Stay safe. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.